This is Jason Marquette from the Institute for Strategic Negotiations. You don't get what you deserve in life, you only get what you negotiate. The Institute for Strategic Negotiations is dedicated to training executives to maximize their returns on negotiations. We offer the world's largest library of negotiating courses for business executives. The Institute for Strategic Negotiations offers courses that are developed and delivered by negotiators with 20 years of relevant experience. ISN instructors are key players in multi-billion-dollar corporate transactions, sophisticated real estate transactions valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars, the licensing of the world's most promising technologies, and in the resolution of international disputes. We invite you to join the hundreds of successful executives who are adding the Institute for Strategic Negotiations Certified Negotiators designation to their resumes. Let the Institute for Strategic Negotiations help boost your business and your career. Visit us at www.instituteforstrategicnegotiations.com. Now let's listen to one of our instructors, David Wanatek, discuss how to discern negotiating partners' real negotiating objectives.
In negotiations, it's very important that we can determine the other side's real interests. The other side is not always interested in maximizing the financial returns from the negotiations. As we'll see in this story that I like to tell about the presidential election of 1912, the opponents can have other interests at heart, other objectives they're trying to achieve in the negotiations. So I tell this story of the presidential election of 1912 not only because it's interesting historically, but because there's a lot of valuable negotiating lessons to be learned from the story. So in the run-up to the presidential election, Teddy Roosevelt was running for the presidency, and the idea for his campaign was to produce 2 million brochures that he would distribute in the Midwest part of the country. He would go on a whistle-stop campaign. The idea was he would make these speeches, his minions would distribute this brochure, and that was the campaign strategy. In the brochure, the inside of the brochure contained an essay that he composed, and the essay was entitled Confessions of Faith. On the outside of the brochure, on the cover of the brochure, was his picture. So anyway, the campaign went about producing these 2 million copies of the brochures. They put the brochures in boxes, they put the boxes on trains, and just before the train was about to depart to make the first whistle-stop speech, a junior campaign worker opened up one of the boxes, took out the brochure, took a closer look at the cover of the brochure, which they saw Roosevelt's picture, and right under Roosevelt's picture it said Moffett Studios, Chicago. So the junior campaign workers that discovered that they may be infringing on Mr. Moffett's rights to the photo were very concerned. They thought, we are in a terrible dilemma. We don't really have any good alternatives. One alternative would be to destroy the brochures and have new brochures reprinted. But in those days, it took a lot of time to print 2 million brochures. They didn't have that time to waste. They would lose a lot of value in the presidential election campaign. Another alternative was to proceed with the whistle-stop campaign and hope that their infringement of Mr. Moffett's rights to the photo would never be detected. But that was very risky because if they proceeded to distribute the brochures with Moffett's photo on the cover, they could have been detected and there could have been bad publicity. The wealthy Mr. Roosevelt was infringing on poor Mr. Moffett's rights to his photo. There could be economic damages levied against the campaign. So proceeding without getting approval to use the rights to the photo was also very risky. Now, most negotiators probably would think, well, why don't we contact Mr. Moffett? Why don't we go meet Mr. Moffett in Chicago? And he's probably reasonable, we're reasonable. Why don't we both put our cards on the table and we'll be able to negotiate a happy median, a happy compromise where both sides can live with that. What happened was the junior campaign workers brought this dilemma to the attention of the campaign manager. The campaign manager's name was George Perkins. George Perkins was a very, very savvy businessman. He was a partner of J.P. Morgan. He owned railroads and newspapers, a very wealthy, successful man. And as soon as he was apprised of the situation, he summoned his stenographer and he dictated a telegram for the stenographer to transmit to Mr. Moffett in Chicago. And the telegram said, "We are about to distribute millions of brochures with Roosevelt's picture on the cover. This will be great publicity for the photographer whose photo we use. How much will you pay us to use yours?" respond immediately. So they sent the telegram to Mr. Moffat. Mr. Moffat received the telegram and responded a day or so later, and his response was, "I've never done anything like this before, but under the circumstances, I'd be pleased to offer you $250. So that was the way that they resolved the issue of potentially infringing on Mr. Moffat's rights to the photo. So I tell the story because there's a lot of important lessons to be learned for negotiators. It addresses the importance of doing due diligence, formulating opening offers, anchoring the negotiations. We'll talk a lot about anchoring negotiations in this course. Using time as a point of leverage against the other side, how to manage the whole process of making concessions. In our situations that we have before us today, you'll find that your counterparts, like Mr. Moffat, are not always interested in money. In some acquisitions, people are very interested about keeping the name of the company the same. They're very concerned about the welfare of their employees. So an acquirer that promises to take good care of the employees post-transaction, that could be very valuable to the seller of the company. Employing the founder's children for a couple of years can be very important. Putting the name of the tenant on a building is very important to the tenant, but doesn't cost the real estate owner anything. Closing a transaction December 31st or January 1st may not be an issue for one party at the negotiating table, but could be very important to the other side. So you can make concessions that are not painful. Acting as a reference, providing a testimonial for the other side doesn't cost you anything, but could be very valuable to the other player at the other side of the table. So there's a host of tools you can use to negotiate that don't cost you anything, and if you determine the other side's true interest, you can use those tools without it really costing you anything. I want to just tell you one more quick story about determining the other side's true interests. And this deals with Michael Faraday, who was the inventor of the electric motor. This was at least 100 years ago. And when Mr. Faraday invented the electric motor, he needed to develop it and commercialize it, have it manufactured. Now, obviously, it was very capital intensive to do that, so he needed to raise capital. But in those days, there was no venture capital community to turn to, so he needed to enlist the support of the British government. And he lobbied to have an audience with Prime Minister Gladstone, at least as the legend goes. And it was very difficult for him to secure an audience with Prime Minister Gladstone. It took him some time, did a lot of lobbying, a lot of finagling, and finally he got Prime Minister Gladstone to agree to meet with him for a few minutes. But it was only for a few minutes. And this was a very big problem for Michael Faraday. How can you possibly communicate the immense mechanical complexities of an electric motor in a few minutes? How can you discuss all the manufacturing and sourcing quandaries that arise? How can you discuss the economic dislocation that may come about when you are dealing with something as revolutionary as an electric motor? This was a very complex issue, and it demanded more than just a few minutes of an audience's time. But anyway, he only had a few minutes, and what happened was when the meeting took place between Prime Minister Gladstone, at least again according to legend, and Michael Faraday, the Prime Minister asked him, what are the benefits of your invention, Mr. Faraday? And Michael Faraday was prepared for this, and he said, you will be able to put a tax on it. So he really got to the heart of the matter, really honed in on what was important to the Prime Minister and to the British government. A couple other examples of determining what is really important to your counterpart deal with Volkswagen. Several years ago, the CEO of Volkswagen was a gentleman by the name of Ferdinand Pike. And what was important to him was not only saving and turning around Volkswagen, but saving the entire German auto manufacturing industry. He was very concerned that the German auto manufacturing sector would be eclipsed by Asian manufacturers. So an argument that would resonate with him was how your proposal is going to help strengthen and embolden the German manufacturing industry. He wasn't so concerned just about the profitability of his own company. Similar to that, Oprah Winfrey was said to have turned down a lucrative venture with a cosmetics company because that company failed to demonstrate a sense of shared social mission with Oprah Winfrey.
To join an open enrollment course, earn your negotiating designation, or to schedule custom negotiations training for your organization, contact us at the Institute for Strategic Negotiations, 609-919-1895, extension 100, or email us at info@bdacademy.com.